everybody. Thank you so much for being with us here today. We're going live with Felipe Marques from Bloomberg. Thank you so much for joining us. So Felipe, tell us, how did you end up here in Miami as the Miami Bureau Chief for Bloomberg News?
So I'm Felipe. I'm the Miami Bureau Chief for Bloomberg News. As you will probably be able to tell during this conversation, I'm Brazilian. And I'm native Brazilian. My parents are Brazilians. English is my second language, so apologies in advance for anything that I might misspeak. I've been with Bloomberg News for almost 6 years. I've worked as a financial reporter in Brazil. And there was an opening for managing the Miami Bureau in Bloomberg. And we will get about what exactly that means in a couple questions later. And I thought there would be a good opportunity because it leveraged a lot of my experience as Brazilian, as Latino, and as a Brazilian reporter, while also opening up a new array of topics and a new array of issues, and living in the U.S., which is something I've always wanted to do for a period of my life at least.
That's awesome. So how was the experience of moving from Brazil, São Paulo specifically, which is where you're from, to Miami?
I have to be honest with you, I've never, ever thought something would be so bureaucratic in my entire life. From getting your social security number when you're a grown-up, which is a nightmare, from getting your driver's license, from doing your taxes, which I have to say, it's not a very pleasant experience. There's a lot of twists that you do not expect coming from such a large move in your life. It's very rewarding though, and specifically in Miami, there's this thing about being a city right in the middle of, let's say, Latin America and the US. So there's all of things that take me back home. There's all of these different things. So it's familiar, but not that much alien for someone that comes from Latin America.
So let's talk a little bit about that familiarity. What were some of the biggest differences that you saw coming from Brazil to the United States?
I would say for sure the way people tend to behave. Even being in Miami, Americans tend to be a little more, I don't want to use the word cold, but it's a little more detached, it's a little bit more pragmatic. We Brazilians and Latinos as a whole, you're laughing because you already know what I'm talking about. We tend to be very personable, very engaging. We tend to be like, let's try and find creative solutions for problems because we're always in environments where you're strapped for resources. So I have to say is a big difference.
So do you ever miss Brazilian food and have that desire and that craving to eat something? And if you do, where do you go to get the Brazilian food?
I still have one big, very large craving that I haven't managed to solve in Miami. Pão de queijos.
Ah, that is amazing.
To a point that I'm actually considering making them at home. all of the pão de queijos I've tried, they miss slightly the mark. And you can probably tell that I'm very picky with my food. But I've been very fortunate to have a lot of people visiting. And all the people that I have visiting, they actually have to pay a toll and bring me something to eat from Brazil. So I'm not missing a lot of Brazilian food.
Oh, well, that's awesome, though, that you get to get some of that piece of Brazil with you still till today. So tell us a little bit about the reporting aspect of it. What are some of the differences or even similarities that you might have found in terms of reporting from Brazil and reporting in Miami? Let
me segue on what you said a little bit, this kind of piece of Brazil that I always carry with me. That's very important in my reporting, actually. So the organization that I work for, Bloomberg News, it's a global organization. So when you're reporting for a global organization based in Brazil, something you always need to do is to find what would make a global reader care about Brazil. So you have to really think hard on how you frame the topics you write or report about to make them interesting for a global audience. And in Bloomberg's case, in particular, a global financial audience. When I'm here in Miami, that's a very, very, very useful skill. Because now when I look at Florida stories, which is my mandate here, I'm always looking for the stories or for ways I can make global readers care for those stories. So in that sense, reporting is very similar. Because you get to use some of that, how do I make this a global story mindset that I've honed in Brazil. What is different, of course, are the sources. I've been a reporter in Brazil I was a reporter in Brazil for almost 10 years. So that means you have a full Rolodex of sources. You know who to call. You quickly know how to solve the problems because you know this person can tell you this person can tell you that. Here, it's all starting from scratch. I, of course, have some sources that I could have in Brazil introduce me to people here, but you're basically starting from scratch. So that kind of thing is exhilarating in a way because you get to do something new. It's very complicated in a way because sometimes news are breaking fast.
Yeah.
And you need someone to talk to about politics, which isn't my area of expertise, but has been a topic that we've been reporting very frequently about.
And in terms of stories themselves, are there any stories that you might want to tell us about your reporting in Brazil and how it might have been similar or maybe even different from a story that you might have written here in Miami?
I'll switch your question around. I'll tell you about a story that I reported here in Miami that I think was really informed by this make a lot with not a lot of resources. When FTX was collapsing, and as you can imagine, that was a big story for Bloomberg, and that's a big story for Miami.
Yep.
Our Kaseya Center used to be named the FTX Arena, after all. I had to find a way to write a story that would connect to the city. That led to a whole adventure of trying to follow FTX's crumbles around the city. You had to go to Wynwood, and then on Wynwood we managed to find this place where there were all of these FTX t-shirts. They were not tossed in the trash, but they were on trash bags. So that formed a very powerful image of what is going on with the company. It's this feeling of like when you have an assignment to do, you have to pull all sorts of resources and get creative because not necessarily you know all of the people that you need to know, but you know you can deliver a story. You know that you can go and embrace the challenge and find a scrappy way of pulling a story together. And that's a really powerful thing that I learned as my career in journalism in Brazil. Like sometimes you get all those left field assignments, then you have to quickly react on your feet on like how you're going to tackle them.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, Felipe. We're here with Felipe Marques having a conversation for the Journalism Speaker Series. Stay tuned for what's next.
Learn and earn today at Miami-Dade College. College graduates earn 56% more than high school graduates and $1 million more in lifetime earnings. A degree from MDC is your path to greater earning power and career success. Choose from hundreds of affordable high-tech and in-demand career programs, including cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, business, and nursing. Learn and earn today at MDC and fast-track your career. Enroll now at mdc.edu/purpose.
We're on again here with Felipe Marques from Bloomberg News. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit more about what your typical day looks like. Although in journalism, news changes everything every single day. What do you typically do on a regular day?
So basically, I wake up every morning, and first thing I do after I brush my teeth, after I actually poured a cup of coffee, because I do not want to wake up and check my emails first thing. My therapist said I was absolutely forbidden to do it, is check my email. See if there's any sort of crisis brewing, any sort of urgent matter that we have to deal with right away. At Bloomberg, we are an organization that thrives on doing on-the-spot news as well. So you have to be aware if there's something huge going on. Like you don't want to be late for the party where everybody's already planning and you're just caught up in the middle. You want to be on top of things. So that's a big part of my job, going through the newspapers as well, what the Miami Herald published, what the Wall Street Journal published about Florida, even what the Financial Times published about Florida, what are the big stories of the day, and then you start thinking, well, there's this big story playing out in Asia. Does it have any sort of repercussions here in Florida? There's a big story playing out in New York. Does it have any sort of repercussions in Florida? So that's when it starts connecting with my day-to-day job. I usually go to the office 5 days a week. I sometimes work 1 day from home, but usually it's for 1 or 5 days a week. After I've had this morning kind of like routine of going through everything, I go to the office and start actually doing the office work. I try and keep at least a part of my day separated for reporting. So I try and take meetings and then do some reporting, do some writing, help other reporters with their stories. It's basically kind of like juggling a lot of very different requests. And then juggling outside requests with the stories that I want to do as well.
Interesting. So tell us a little bit more about the management and leadership aspect of being the Miami Bureau Chief.
Okay, so that's a tricky question. I've always been a reporter. Like my whole career as a journalist, I've been a reporter. And then I applied for this job, which has chief on the title and actually requires some sort of management skills. I was very nervous about it. And a good part of the Miami Bureau is that it's a small bureau. So that means you don't do a lot of management and you also do a lot of reporting. And I think that's part of why I decided to take on this job. But it's kind of like developing a new skill, like how you actually help other reporters achieve their best stories. How do you make sure you're connecting all the dots in an organization? And in a way, the way I approach management, it's just like a reporter would approach a story. Have you talked to all the people you need to talk to? Is everybody aware that you're going to publish that story? Have you thought of like the possible repercussions the story is going to have? So it's just like being a little bit of using some of that reporting skill, but more on a like inside the organization, not just outside the organization.
How many reporters are in?
So currently we're hopefully soon expanding the bureau, but as of now I have one more junior reporter and a senior reporter. So it's the two of us, and we do have an office here in Miami. So that makes basically 3 reporters. And we have other Bloomberg staff in the city as well. We have an opinion columnist, we have someone that handles media partnerships. They're all based in Miami. They don't necessarily answer to me. I'm more responsible for the news part of the operation. But under me, I have basically two reporters and myself.
So how do you remain organized, having so many different things to do? How do you make sure that you actually get to it all?
Another difficult question, and another thing that I'm always trying to do every single day. The one thing that is very helpful for me is doing like postmortems. So we're all going to make mistakes. I'm always going to miss an important email. I'm probably going to forget about an important meeting. I'm probably going to forget to let someone know about an important story. Whenever something like that happens, I try and look at what went wrong and what could I have possibly done to make sure that that wouldn't happen again. So one of the things that's been helping me a lot is like prioritizing emails. This is an email that I have to get to by the end of the day. It gets on a separate inbox. And then at the end of the day, I check that inbox and see if I've gone through everything that I needed to. I always keep lists, like actual written lists in front of me. Whenever I talk to someone, I write out a bullet point saying, send something to X person. And then by the end of the day, I go through that list and start checking if I've done everything that I'm supposed to do on that list. But I have to say it's a constant struggle. Like you mentioned that in the beginning. There's no typical day for us. You make a lot of lists, and then news gets in the way. You get swept up with coverage. All of the beautiful lists you made are literally swept under the rug.
Yeah, for sure. Tell us a little bit more about your reporting. I saw that you covered a lot of the DeSantis feud with Disney, and this is supposed to be an important week because he is very likely to be announcing his presidential run this week. So how do you prepare for a story like that, and how are you actually preparing for that story?
So I do think that, first of all, in Bloomberg, there's a virtue of being such a gigantic news organization is that you have a lot of people thinking about how can we prepare, what kind of work needs to be done. I do not want to, there's one thing that is really important in journalism, being ready, planning, preparing. So making sure that what are the stories you have in the work for this week. He's going to probably announce some sort of, he's going to probably make some sort of announcement this week or the other week. Mm-hmm. How do we have a step back piece in place? Are we working on something that we can actually tell a bigger story for readers on? And then it's all about like brainstorming what are these ideas, what can we do to show readers like a full slate of what DeSantis did in Florida, or is there any aspect that we haven't reported that might be interesting for global readers to know at this particular point in time? So it's a lot of planning, a lot of calls.
Tell us about some of the favorite stories you might have written, or a story that taught you something that you now think back on every time.
I'll tell you my most challenging experience as a journalist, and it happened literally 3 or 2 months ago. I've always been a print journalist. That means that I've always practiced journalism in written form. Mm-hmm. So it's always about the turn of phrases, how we start a story, the characters, like having a good quote. That's the way I was taught to think. Those are the terms that I've been trained to think about. This year, I did a live interview for 45 minutes with one of the most high-profile recent migrants in Miami, billionaire Ken Griffin. And that was live for 45 minutes. I was sweating buckets, 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 buckets. I couldn't sleep for 2 days.
Prior to the interview?
I woke up at night thinking of what could go wrong. Thinking like, I'm going to look like an idiot. I'm going to make a stupid question. I'm going to make a stupid English mistake live on TV. I'm going to freeze. I'm going to blurt out something that's moronic. Basically 2 days without sleeping. What did I do to remedy that? Being prepared. And like asking people for help. I ask a lot of people at Bloomberg, can you help me make sure I'm prepared? Can I run my questions through you? Can I run the delivery of the questions through you? Can you go with me through like the whole schedule of the interview? And then people would say, well, this question you should nix, this one you should mix with this other question. Ask for help. Like, go to your mentors, find people who are willing to help. There's always going to be I'm going to steal what a colleague at Bloomberg says, there's always going to be the coalition of the willing. You have to find in your job who are the people who are willing to help. Mm-hmm. Sure. That was very, very challenging. I think it worked out pretty well, but it was pretty challenging.
Well, I'm glad it worked out. Thank you so much. This is Felipe Marques, and we are live once again to speak at the Journalism Speaker Series. Thank you.
Learn and earn today at Miami-Dade College. College graduates earn 56% more than high school graduates and $1 million more in lifetime earnings. A degree from MDC is your path to greater earning power and career success. Choose from hundreds of affordable high-tech and in-demand career programs, including cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, business, and nursing. Learn and earn today at MDC and fast-track your career. Enroll now at mdc.edu/purpose.
Hi, we're on again with Felipe Marques from Bloomberg News. Thank you, Felipe, for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit more about how you got into journalism. What compelled you about it?
I would say that I've always wanted to find a way to make a living out of telling stories. And being a writer doesn't sound like being a science fiction writer or like writing books doesn't sound like a very good way of making a living unless you're like, I don't know, Stephen King or whatever. So journalism it is. And I also was kind of like very interested in very different topics. I think a lot of journalists are hungry for pieces and bits of knowledge. So that kind of like what pulled me into the whole journalism thing to start with.
So journalism is a tough industry, and sometimes we're even called enemies of the state. How do you keep yourself motivated and engaged in this industry? And have you ever thought about leaving it?
Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit of a story about myself. When I was, I think, 3 years in the profession, that was before I joined Bloomberg, while I was a financial reporter in Brazil, I almost got into law school because I was set on my mind that like I love journalism, but there was no career to be had in journalism. There was no expectations of career progression. I couldn't see myself. I couldn't see where I would be in 5 years career-wise. I wasn't seeing a lot of opportunities. And then for some reason, I thought being a lawyer would bring more opportunities or something. And I'm very, very, very thankful for not doing that, because I love what I do. I do it at a company now that gives me a lot of opportunities. Even where I was before Bloomberg, that was just a phase. Things progressed. I got to do different reporting on different topics. But it's a very difficult career. There's not a lot of jobs that pay enough to make a decent living. A lot of publications are in financial problems. So it's not a tough industry. You always think about quitting. Hopefully you don't, but you always think about quitting.
And how did you find your niche in economics and financials?
So another thing about myself, when I joined journalism school, I thought it was going to be like a writer about, I don't know, movies, food, topics that I actually enjoyed. I don't think anyone goes into journalism school thinking, let's write about hedge funds, or like, let's write about equity derivatives. But when I got into journalism school, and was this whole thing I was talking about, being a writer, but finding some sort of pragmatism on it, I realized, thanks to a college professor that helped me kind of like format this thinking, that you needed to have a niche. You need to have some sort of specialized skill that other journalists don't necessarily have. And that's going to help make you stand out from all of the people that want specific jobs. Mm-hmm. How I landed on economics, I think it's more about, I didn't detest working with numbers. I thought that was a niche where you could, when you work with economics, when you work with financial journalism, you're working directly with money. You're working with like the engines of economic growth. So there is a lot of people who would be willing to spend money to read high quality stories about it. So that makes it more financially sound than general journalism. Mm-hmm. Making it more financially sound, it means that there are more jobs and more quality jobs. So that's kind of like the thinking that I have. It's very pragmatic, but in a way I don't regret it, because there is a lot of room for interesting stories to be told in financial journalism.
You've been with Bloomberg for about 6 years or more.
Yeah.
Right? And before that, you were also with a print organization, and you were writing also about economics.
Yeah.
But how did you get used to writing about numbers and knowing the terms? And did you have to do some sort of program or anything like that to prepare yourself?
First of all, Google is your best friend. If someone says something you don't understand, if someone uses a term that you don't understand, write it down or flat out ask. We're reporters. If someone says a word that you're not 100% sure what it means, you can ask something like, well, can you explain it to, how would you explain this to like a 5-year-old? If you don't want to sound that you don't know, but then you ask the person to rephrase what he just said in other terms. And then from that you learn. And then you start creating some sort of knowledge. Of course, I did some specific courses, but nothing like college level courses. It was more courses on business reporting, basics of business, something, to be honest, that you could find on YouTube these days. Like, there's a lot of resources for someone who wants to learn. And we're reporters. Like, learning is basically what we do. Mm-hmm. We learn about things. We learn about stories people usually don't want us learning about. and then we publish them and make a lot of people angry, and hence enemies of state. But it's about learning. It's like figuring out creative ways of learning.
How do you work to stay competitive in the industry? For example, against other organizations like the Wall Street Journal. How do you keep up with all of that?
Oh boy. Basically, I keep trying to. I think a good thing about competitiveness is that it tries and push you in the right direction. So it's always about, they broke this news. Who do they have access that I don't? How can I get access to that person? Or they wrote this story. I wish I had written the story. What other story can I write that it's kind of like in that vicinity that would help me get access to those people? So it's always about being very strategic. We are talking about planning. Competitiveness, in my head, starts with planning. You have to look at a story and be able to strategize. Like, who are the sources? Who did they talk to? Who should I be meeting with? Who are the next emerging power players in South Florida? Which of them I don't know? Who I still need to meet? So it's always like trying to strategize, trying to run scenarios, being 5 steps ahead, which is very time consuming, but it's how you stay competitive.
And lastly, what advice would you give to a young journalist, or even to yourself when you were just getting started in journalism?
First, do not give up. You're going to feel tempted to do it. You're going to see yourself as a lawyer. Your dad is going to say you're going to make a great lawyer. Do not listen to him. The world needs reporters. The world needs a lot of people willing to do the journalistic work. Stick with it. Find a niche. Find something that sets you apart. Be it a specific topic, be a specific tool, be a specific skill. Find your niche.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Felipe, for being with us here today. And that is it for today for the episode of the Journalism Speaker Series. Thank you so much.